truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, August 30th, 2024, the 1318th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so yesterday we talked about social media and the big tech platforms. We talked about censorship and the recent arrest of Telegram founder Pavel Durov. And we went through Tucker Carlson's interview of Mike Benz, where he talks about how all of those things play a critical role in the global regime's color revolution playbook. as part of the strategy to overthrow governments in countries around the world, eventually bringing all of those countries under the control of that same global regime. If we pay attention, we can see that playing out in cyclical fashion all over the world, and we can see it happening throughout history as we look back. The regime is able to do this over and over and over, rewriting history as they go, so they always seem like they were oppressed. They were not the oppressors. They were the victims, and they figured out a way to rise above. And they're able to do this because until very recently, they had full control over the means of communication. They could control people's access to communication platforms and channels. They would control what could be communicated through those platforms and channels. They would fill those platforms and channels with all of their own propaganda, their own messaging, and never-ending marketing campaign for a false reality that allows them to amass all the wealth and power and status anyone could ever have. And when you control the means of communication, to some large degree, you control what people think. You control the contents of the collective mind, which means you can control opinion and you can control behavior, which means you can build up reputations or destroy them. You can cover up the scandals of your own side or create scandals out of nothing to take down your enemies. And to all of that, you can add a full control over the global currency. You can make countries wealthy or bankrupt them. And the same is true of companies. You can control trade routes and stage boycotts or enact sanctions. And if you don't have control of everything by that point, well, then you have militaries to force compliance, and that's how things have been. But they don't seem to be that way anymore. It doesn't seem like the regime's representatives in the United States, the uniparty leaders, namely Joe Biden, doesn't seem like Joe Biden or his people have any control over the military. It doesn't seem like the regime has control over the means of information, as more people are awakening every day to see how fraudulent and fake everything is. And their control over the currency is slipping away as the BRICS coalition continues to grow. This was never the case throughout history. There was always a propaganda war to be waged and won, always a boycott to be staged, always sanctions to be enacted and countries to be bankrupted, and militaries around the world to enforce it. But we don't see that now. We see a multipolar world emerging, and we see nothing that can successfully stop it. And we'll get back to that, but I want to start out with the fake vice president and the fake vice president's fake vice president doing an interview together on CNN with Dana Bash. This is the first interview for the fake Kamala Harris campaign since it began 40 days ago, which I guess makes it a big deal. The eyes of the nation were focused on an interview by Dana Bash on CNN of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Why did Kamala Harris bring her fake vice presidential candidate with her? Because she couldn't do it herself. She needed somebody to look to. She needed that old football coach to be able to say some nice down-home things. Oh, he's going to say some nice Midwestern things. They gave Twinkle Toes Timmy Walz a few chances to talk, and he said that he agrees with Kamala Harris about pretty much everything. They both said child tax credit a bunch of times. Tim Walz bragged that with that, they eliminated 1/3 of child poverty in Minnesota. And of course, the Minnesota government determines how those statistics are compiled and how they will then interpret them and communicate them to the public. But we'll just assume that he's right and that providing a $6,000 credit in the first year of life one time has almost cured child poverty. Well, why not just triple it? Why not stop taxing people? And I bet you can get rid of all of it. Of course, Kamala Harris thought it was 50% of all child poverty across the United States. And I'm not going to take the time to pursue this fake data, but I would be willing to bet a whole lot that they were comparing numbers from the worst point in the very deadly pandemic to the best point we've seen over the last 4 years. But do the details about the numbers that the government compiled about the impact of the child tax credit need our attention? Well, no, of course they don't. We got to get rid of the income tax. We don't need to play around the margins with this nonsense. The federal government should not be robbing the American people for any reason whatsoever. And when we force them to stop doing that, we won't need to worry about how much of our own money they will dangle over us like a treat, so we beg. But I digress. Tim Walz's real job was to sit there and, I guess, look like a very responsible, respectable, likable, non-threatening old white man. They focus grouped that and figured that would be the best idea. Now, apparently, Kamala and Tim were in Georgia. So Dana Bash met them somewhere in Georgia. It looks like an abandoned WeWork, to be honest. There are about 8 coffee cups strewn across the tables in the background of the shot that CNN projected into, I was going to say millions, but it can't be millions, of homes. They filmed the interview at what looks like an abandoned office with glass walls. For whatever reason, Tim Walz and Dana Bash looked absolutely giant, and the 5'2" Kamala Harris looked very tiny, like she could kick her feet beneath her chair without touching the ground. It was not very presidential, but then again, Kamala Harris is a fake presidential candidate in a fake campaign leading up to a fake election. And I know people get tired of me saying that, and they're like, yeah, we understand you think the whole thing's fake, but it's still real. No, it's not still real. It is an orchestrated reality show being broadcast to you on television, being reported about in newspapers, and commented about on social media, but it is not, by any means, a real election. It doesn't fit any of the definitions of a real election. And if it's not a real election, then it's certainly not a real campaign. And no one that Kamala wants to eventually represent as fake president ever supported her even having the opportunity until she was chosen for them. Who is making them look like this on TV? Who is allowing it to happen? Is the Barack Obama political machine, those experts at modern politics and modern campaigns, the experts at creating vibes and an illusion of popularity, are they allowing Kamala Harris to look like this? How's it happening? I hope one day we find out. They're protecting her from doing an interview all alone, and they're protecting her from doing a live interview, and they're protecting her from doing an unedited, taped interview. Her first interview as the fake presidential candidate, 40 days into her fake campaign, she brought a backup along, better safe than sorry, and the interview was under a half an hour. They only ended up airing 18 minutes of it. And at some point over the next few days, it's expected that the rest of it will leak. And when it leaks, then we'll see the real Kamala. And that Kamala will be even more incompetent than the Kamala that at least a few people in America saw last night. And they'll say, by golly, CNN was trying to protect Kamala Harris. And oh, the internet will argue over that for a day or so. And the 10 or 12 or 15% of people who are actually supporting Kamala Harris will say, you're taking Kamala Harris out of context. Those are the moments that make her look stupid. And to that I'll say, no, CNN is taking Kamala Harris out of content. They broadcast the clips that they thought didn't make Kamala Harris look stupid. The only effort to decontextualize any portion of that interview was made by CNN, probably in coordination with Kamala Harris's campaign, and that was to make Kamala seem smart. In the lead up to the interview, and it kind of overlaps with this lead up to the September 10th debate, or so we're told, we've been hearing, partially from Trump, about whether the moderators or Dana Bash, the interviewer, might give Kamala the questions in advance. But I think that might be giving too much credit to the media, assuming that they're actually coming up with the questions and writing them on their own. But of course, Kamala Harris's fake campaign, just like any uniparty candidate's fake campaign, will have its media contacts and feed stories and talk about what they'd like to talk about. And we'll see that in the interview. It wasn't so much that Dana Bash was serving up softballs, and of course she was. It's that she was providing obvious setups for campaign talking points and then keeping her journalistic quote-unquote credibility by telling Tim Walz that he lied about something everyone knows he lied about, and repeating the question to Kamala Harris after she gave a non-answer that was predictably followed by another non-answer. Trump called the interview boring, and it certainly was that. And we'll get to that in a second, but first, Kamala did one of her very popular rallies in Georgia, and you have to assume at this point that the only people attending these things are union members who are being paid or given a paid day of leave from work to attend these. There have been reports of that in multiple cities at this point. And as you probably heard in some of the Mike Benz clips yesterday, he was talking about rent-a riots and how the labor unions were always the go-to vendor to supply attendees to look like there was an actual cause being supported. But Kamala got heckled, and she got a little nervous.
Hold up for a second. Let me just say something. We are fighting for a democracy. Everyone has a right and should have their voices heard. I am speaking now, but on the subject, I will say this. The president and I are working around the clock. We've got to get a hostage deal done and get a ceasefire done now.
Oh, it went viral because she's getting heckled. But it also went viral so that the messaging could be delivered that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are looking for a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine right now. They can't believe it's been delayed so long. They tried to blame it on Donald Trump just a week or so ago, and that didn't work, so it's nobody's fault. Now, we know about those crazed leftists always supporting Palestine, those Hamas protesters who nearly took over the DNC. She's got to pander to them at least a little bit, while making sure not to offend her Zionist overlords who are also funding the Hamas and Palestine thing. And it's good that she calls for this ceasefire. She says she and Joe Biden have been working around the clock to get the deal done. Except the thing is, Joe Biden was in Rehoboth Beach, and then he was in California for a week, and now he's back on the beach in Delaware. He doesn't seem to be working at all, and again, it's in the normie sphere now. They say, who's running this country? Oh, if only we knew the answer. Kamala Harris had another bout of being extra black during her speech yesterday. I'm sure that Black Americans all across the country feel like they can much better relate to her now. And then she showed that illegitimacy, corruption, incompetence, and communism were not the only things she shared with Joe Biden.
He even called for termination of the United States Supreme, the supreme land of our nation, the United States Constitution.
Now, with Joe Biden, it was easy to just say, yeah, well, he's demented and was never that bright to begin with. And Kamala Harris is certainly halfway there. She has never been bright, but she's not demented. She's reading her speech off a teleprompter, and she has no idea what her speech means. She may have read through it before. She knows all the words are there, but in a deeper way, she has no idea what she's saying. And that became immediately obvious in the interview. From the first question, Dana Bash asked her what she would do on day one, and she began listing the traditional platitudes of the Democrat establishment so that when stories are written and comments are given on her answer to that question of what she would do on day one, the pro-Kamala propaganda machine can simply repeat the same platitudes and fill in the blanks however they like, just as we heard that Kamala Harris surrogate describing last week. Here's the fake vice president.
You have less time to make your case to voters than any candidate in modern American history. The voters are really eager to hear what your plans are. If you are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you first and foremost, one of my
highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and in an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation, and I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So what would you do day one?
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life, to help them buy a car seat, to help them buy baby clothes, a crib. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one.
What about you?
And then Tim Walz says the same amount of nothing. On day one, she's going to implement her plans for what she calls her opportunity economy. That's what she laid out a couple weeks ago. Her price controls, giving money to home buyers for their down payments, policies that will never work. They will only make things worse, but they are communism. And that's her real job, to implement communism. And then again with the child tax credit. So day one in office, she'll try to implement her opportunity economy, which is something that she actually can't just do as president. And then she will bestow on us a series of abstractions that we should generally agree might be good. She talked about how the former president was very divisive and he degraded what it means to be American. Now, everything she said was a perfect description of Joe Biden, but we have to assume that she's talking about Donald Trump. The economic policies were rejected even by media outlets that support the Democrat establishment. So it's really just about the abstractions. A vibes-based campaign gets us vibes-based results. She talked about a change, a moving forward, turning the page on the past. Joe Biden did a great job and she did a great job with Joe Biden, but we've got to turn the page. It's time for a change. A change from what? To what? Doesn't matter. We've just heard people like change. But what change could there possibly be? It's one illegitimate uniparty candidate replacing another illegitimate uniparty candidate. It wouldn't matter whether she's replacing a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter if she's a Democrat or a Republican. The same agenda is going to be implemented no matter who is pretending to be in that office. The office is either legitimate or it's not. And if it's not legitimate, it doesn't represent the people, it doesn't govern with the will and consent of the people, then it's there on behalf of the uniparty. And of course, that's why the other side of the uniparty is coming out in such strength to support her. You know, it's also worth mentioning in relation to the Mike Benz conversation with Tucker Carlson and Mark Zuckerberg's admissions about things we've known for years now, the government requests to censor American citizens in direct violation of the First Amendment. It's being attributed to the Biden-Harris administration. But of course, the Hunter Biden laptop censorship happened during the Trump administration. But it wasn't Trump doing it, and nobody believes that Trump was requesting the government censor Americans in direct violation of the First Amendment for the things they were saying online. Nobody has had more online hatred directed at him than Donald J. Trump. There's a global effort employing every institution of the old guard to make sure that all channels and platforms are filled with only anti-Trump content to the extent they're able to do so. So it would be shocking if Donald Trump was requesting that. There's nothing like that on the other side. And the proof is because no one on the other side complains about being censored. In fact, they recommend censorship for us. And the only way anyone could do that is if they don't experience it themselves. So what does it mean then that a part of the government was requesting the censorship of American citizens from these big tech corporations in direct violation of the First Amendment, all their efforts in opposition to the president whose administration they were serving? Kind of begins to sound a lot like treason. It's an undeniable indication of the presence of the Uniparty. It's an undeniable indication of the presence of the deep state. Federal government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, violating the First Amendment rights of the American people en masse to take out the president they're supposed to be serving. How about that? But I know, the Uniparty is a conspiracy theory. Dana Bash asked Kamala Harris if she wants to do all of these amazing things and she's going to provide this change. Why didn't she ever talk about any of it before? Why was none of this accomplished under this amazing Biden-Harris administration?
That dream.
So you have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it. So now, as I travel in the state of Georgia and around our country, the number of seniors that have benefited, I was in Nevada recently, a grandmother who showed me her receipts. And before we capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month, she was paying hundreds of dollars, up to thousands of dollars a month for her insulin. She's not doing that anymore.
You maintain Bidenomics is a success.
I maintain that when we do the work of bringing down prescription medication for the American people, including capping the cost of the annual cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000, when we do what we did in the first year of being in office to extend the child tax credit so that we cut child poverty in America by over 50%, when we do what we have done to invest in the American people and bringing manufacturing back to the United States so that we created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs, bringing business back to America, what we have done to improve the supply chain so we're not relying on foreign governments to supply American families with their basic needs, I'll say that that's good work. There's more to do, but that's good work.
The question is why she didn't do all the things she's saying she's going to do that would represent change in the last 3.5 years. Why didn't she do them then? And she said, well, first we had to recover. And she explained that at greater length earlier. COVID just wrecked everything. It was all Donald Trump's fault. And so Joe and Kamala, they were behind the 8 ball. They had to do yeoman's work just to get us out of that hole. And that's what prevented them from implementing this agenda, replete with nothing but abstractions. It takes a vibes-based campaign to yield vibes-based results. And if you're going to implement a vibes-based agenda, well, first you have to recover. And so the need to recover was the reason why she didn't get those abstractions accomplished. And after she makes that excuse, she rattles off some things that Donald Trump did to claim that it doesn't matter what we didn't do, it matters what we're taking credit for. Don't focus on our negatives, focus on Trump's positives, things that were so positive that they just kept happening even after Donald Trump just wasn't quote-unquote president anymore. Joe and Kamala, we're re-onshoring American manufacturing. We're bringing blue-collar American jobs back to America. Donald Trump said he was going to fix drug pricing, and he did. It just didn't start until Joe and Kamala, so they did it. He brought down insulin prices, but then Joe Biden took them back up and then brought them back down. Now they're down, so Kamala gets credit. Why haven't we accomplished the things I say I'll do? Because we were too busy not accomplishing the things that Trump did. Does that make sense? Well, sort of, in a vibes-based way. Kamala said she's going to change, but also stay the same. In fact, she's always stayed the same. while she's changing.
Generally speaking, how should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and by extension the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed.
Now, the context was Kamala Harris changing her position on fracking. She used to say that we should do away with it, and then she changed her position during the 2020 campaign. She has the same position now as she did in 2020, and she promises not to change again. But what's important is that her values have not changed. And the example that she gives is that when it comes to the climate stuff, she's focused on certain metrics that have to do with sticking to deadlines around time, not only on when the standards will be changed, but also when they'll have meetings. Maybe I'm missing something, but it sounded like she just said that they use the Inflation Reduction Act to implement the Green New Deal. But the bottom line is that she's bragging about the country sticking to the implementation of the global regime's agenda. That's what she's saying. That's what the accomplishments are. It's not accomplishments for the American people. It's not accomplishments for the environment. She is actually bragging to people who care about this that they were able to meet the goals of the global regime's agenda, because that's the purpose of government in America at this point. That's what this illegitimate corporate board of the occupying global regime does in Washington, D.C. They implement the global regime's agenda, and their goal is to meet all the deadlines set out by those global governing bodies. Whatever power and influence, compromise, and corruption are necessary to get that job done, they'll do it. And then they will brag about having done it, because that's their real job. It sounds like inane nonsense and babble because it's so disconnected from everyone's lives. It has nothing to do with the question that was asked in any context that normal people would perceive. But if you understand the inversion, both the question and the answer make complete and total sense. Dana Bash is acting as a public representative of that global regime, asking the question to Kamala Harris. Hey, our agenda is to end fracking. You used to want to end fracking. Then you changed your mind and said that you were okay with fracking continuing. And now you're saying you're still okay with fracking continuing, which you have to say because otherwise it would just be even harder to convince people that you won this rigged election. You can't even make it believable to the point where people would ignore it like they did in 2020. So you have to say it, but how can we trust you? And Kamala Harris basically says, we've met all our deadlines so far. Kamala Harris, at least at a surface level interpretation, is clearly the beneficiary of the coup against the fake president, if indeed you can call it a coup when a fake president is removed. Let's hear her discuss this very important subject.
Vice President Harris, you were a very staunch defender of President Biden's capacity to serve another 4 years. Right after the debate, you insisted that President Biden is extraordinarily strong. Given where we are now, do you have any regrets about what you told the American people?
No, not at all. Not at all. I have served with President Biden for almost 4 years now, and I'll tell you, it's one of the greatest honors of my career, truly. He cares so deeply about the American people. He is so smart and loyal to the American people. And I have spent hours upon hours with him, be it in the Oval Office or the Situation Room. He has the intelligence, the commitment, and the judgment and disposition that I think the American people rightly deserve in their president. By contrast, the former president has none of that. And so, one, I am so proud to have served as vice president to Joe Biden. And two, I am so proud to be running with Tim Walz for president of the United States and to bring America what I believe the American people deserve, which is a new way forward, and turn the page on the last decade of what I believe has been contrary to where the spirit of our country really lies.
But the last 3.5 years has been part of your administration.
I'm talking about an era that started about a decade ago, where there is some suggestion, warped I believe it to be, that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of where I believe most Americans are, which is to believe that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up.
So the question was, do you regret telling the American people that Joe Biden was strong and fit? And she says, no, because it's been such a big honor to work with Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has the intelligence and the stamina and the decency and blah, blah, blah to be what the American people deserve. And Donald Trump is not like that. Therefore, I was totally warranted in lying to the American people about Joe Biden's fitness after the debate. But here's the inside scoop.
Staying on President Biden, when he called you and said he was pulling out of the race, what was that like? And did he offer to endorse you right away, or did you ask for it?
It was a Sunday, so here I'll give you a little too much information.
Go for it. There's no such thing, Madam Vice President.
My family was staying with us, and including my baby nieces, and we had just had pancakes and, Auntie, can I have more bacon? Yes, I'll make you more bacon. And then we were sitting down to do a puzzle. And the phone rang, and it was Joe Biden. And he told me what he had decided to do. And I asked him, are you sure? And he said yes. And that's how I learned about it.
And what about the endorsement? Did you ask for it?
He was very clear that he was going to support me.
So when he called to tell you, he said, I'm pulling out of the race and I'm going to support you.
Well, my first thought was not about me, to be honest with you. My first thought was about him, to be honest. I think history is going to show a number of things about Joe Biden's presidency. I think history is going to show that in so many ways it was transformative, be it on what we have accomplished around finally investing in America's infrastructure, investing in new economies, in new industries, what we have done to bring our allies back together and have confidence in who we are as America and grow that alliance, what we have done to stand true to our principles, including the one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I think history is going to show not only has Joe Biden led an administration that has achieved those extraordinary successes, but the character of the man is one that he has been in his life and career, including as a president, quite selfless and puts the American people first.
So what was it like when Joe Biden called you to tell you that he was ending his campaign? Well, let me tell you what it would have been like if I actually had my family over and I was cooking breakfast for my nieces the next morning. Ha ha ha. This might be TMI, but they call me Auntie. Ha ha ha. I made them more bacon. Also, one of our biggest accomplishments was doing the things that the global regime wants us to do. We made sure to let our allies know that we are doing the things we're supposed to be doing on their behalf. And hey, also, did I tell you that Joe Biden is the most honest man ever? And in fact, he's selfless. He hasn't spent 50 years profiting while selling out the interests of his constituents, whether they're his Delaware constituents when he was a senator, selling out to all of the corporations based in Delaware, or when he was selling out the interests of all the American people by making massive deals with our greatest adversaries. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of vibes-based questions that Dana Bash has asked. How did she get to be such a tough customer? I don't know. Why aren't you asking, how did Kamala Harris survive this onslaught?
Puts the American people first.
I just have to ask you both about two standout moments, aside, of course, from the addresses that you both gave, but standout moments that were perhaps unexpected during the convention. You mentioned one of them, Governor. A moment that you shared, that the world shared with your son, Gus. You were speaking, the camera caught him, so incredibly proud of you, so emotional, saying, "That's my dad."
Yeah, I don't know as a father I could have ever imagined that. I'm grateful for so many reasons to be on this ticket, but that moment, to understand what was really important, to have my son feel a sense of pride in me, that I was trying to do the right thing. And it was, you try and protect your kids, it brings notoriety and things, but it was just such a visceral, emotional moment that I'm grateful I got to experience it, and I'm so proud of him. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of Hope. I'm proud of Gwen. She's a wonderful mother, and these are great kids. And I think the one thing is, talking about the era we're in, is our politics can be better. It can be different. We can show some of these things, and we can have families involved in this. And I hope that I hope people felt that out there, and I hope they hug their kids a little tighter, because you just never know, and life can be kind of hard.
And last question, Madam Vice President, the photograph that has gone viral. You were speaking, one of your grandnieces that you were just talking about was watching you accept the nomination. You didn't explicitly talk about gender or race in your speech, but it obviously means a lot to a lot of people, and that viral picture really says it. What does it mean to you?
I am running because I believe that I am the best person to do this job at this moment, for all Americans, regardless of race and gender. But I did see that photograph, and I was deeply touched by it. And you're right, it's the back of her head, her two little braids, and then I'm in the front of the photograph, obviously speaking. And it's very humbling. It's very humbling in many ways.
All right, so Tim Walz's son was going bonkers at the convention. He kind of resembled Brendan Fraser at the 2010 Golden Globes, combined with Kyle Rittenhouse on the witness stand, crying and screaming, "That's my dad," while clapping harder than anyone has ever clapped. Thank goodness there was a microphone right there in the audience to get his reaction. But Tim Walz's son, Gus, obviously thinks all of this is real and very important, and his dad is doing something great. And I don't want to burst the kid's bubble. Then Dana Bash asks Kamala about this quote-unquote iconic picture that I had never seen till yesterday. And I posted an article about it, and no one else had ever seen it either. This was yet another contrived moment from a totally contrived Democrat National Convention. The shot was taken by some New York Times photographer from a low angle, Kamala Harris up high on the stage, her tiny, tiny body rising above the obviously tiny, tiny podium. And in the foreground, the back of a head of a small girl with two braids coming out the sides of her head. Black hair. She looked like a future person of color. Right now, she's just a small, ethnically ambiguous piece of propaganda. So they set this picture up at the Democrat National Convention. They grabbed Kamala's niece, Amara. They set her right up in front of the stage and photographed the back of her head while Kamala was talking. That's not a natural picture. That's a photo op. It's a staged piece of content for a purpose. And then immediately, all of the paid Democrat influencers began posting about how it was the most wonderful picture that had ever been taken. Rex Chapman, who used to be an NBA player, said maybe the best thing I've ever seen. John Cryer, who used to be a comedian, said, I'm hoping this is the defining image of this era. And George Conway, who used to be Kellyanne Conway's husband, said at Pulitzer Prizes, no need to look any further. Other Biden influencers also agreed that it was worthy of a Pulitzer Prize. And the news articles made sure to point that out. Is any of this natural? No, but it really brings out the vibes, as does Dana Bash's question. She took 3 or 4 minutes of an 18-minute interview to ask the fake vice president's fake vice president how he feels about his son spazzing out at the DNC, and then asks Kamala Harris how she feels about this iconic photo that was taken of her, as though it was just a random candid that really caught the real vibes of the vibes-based campaign. And just one more clip and we'll get to some of the response.
Is traveling the country extensively. I mean, I'm here in Georgia. I think somebody told me 17 times since I've been vice president in Georgia alone. I believe it is important to build consensus, and it is important to find a common place of understanding of where we can actually solve problems.
On that note, you had a lot of Republican speakers at the convention. Will you appoint a Republican to your cabinet?
Yes, I would.
Anyone in mind?
Would. No one in particular in mind. We got 68 days to go with this election, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse, but I would.
Now, it's interesting that she points out she's visited Georgia 17 times. Donald Trump has said many times he visited Washington, D.C. only 17 times before he became president. And then Dana Bash asks her another obvious setup question that you have to assume was suggested by the campaign. Donald Trump had Robert F. Kennedy join him last week. Donald Trump, the enemy of all Democrats and independents, according to the television, now has an entire Democrat and independent wing of his campaign. There's talk of a unity party and the potential for a team of rivals in the next Trump White House. Donald Trump is uniting the country around shared values, if not a shared agenda. And so, of course, Kamala Harris doesn't want to be painted as an extreme leftist. I mean, she is an extreme leftist. Her father was a Marxist professor. Tim Walz is an extreme leftist. These are communists through and through, but she can't seem that way, and they're not going to market her that way, not while the uniparty right is beginning to support her campaign publicly, all happy to reveal themselves to the world and say, yeah, it is a uniparty. If she's going to keep representing herself as a communist, it's just going to be too hard to sell. So Dana Bash asks a question about whether Kamala would be up for naming a Republican to her cabinet, and Kamala says, yeah, I think I would. That sounds really nice. I don't know who it would be, but I'm going to put someone with an R next to her name in my cabinet. That will make me look like I'm very responsible. Potentially, people will even see me as moderate as long as someone in my cabinet had an R next to her name at some point. Now, I'm not saying it will be Condoleezza Rice, but they do need a black woman, let's be honest. No one's going to accept an old Republican white man. And Condoleezza was mentioned by Rosa Brooks as one of the people who could host a conversation during the Blitz primary at the convention. So she's got to be in the mix. Now, as soon as the interview ended, CNN went to their studio panel hosted by Abby Phillip. Abby Phillip is a black woman. On the panel were 2 black women, a black man, David Axelrod, who was Obama's former campaign manager, and then Scott Jennings, who has been the token Republican on CNN for like the last decade. That bad era in America, as Kamala Harris refers to it. And of course, when Kamala says it, she means the time that Donald Trump has been around. That's been the really bad time in America. Abby Phillip went first to Axelrod, asking him if Kamala Harris met the moment in this 18-minute long edited interview, for which she brought a chaperone.
So I think on the whole, this was a good night. It wasn't a huge, I don't think she moved the ball that much forward, but she certainly didn't fall back.
The do no harm principle of politicking.
And that set the tone for the conversation. It was about whether or not she was able to move the ball down the field. They were confident that she hadn't made things worse. If anything, she might have even made things better. But what was important was she was playing the game. She was in there creating vibes. Axelrod mentioned that she came off as serious and competent in a way that she didn't in 2019. And he suggested that she cleared the lowest of bars whether or not she seemed to be someone who could be president of the United States. And I had this very strange feeling watching this CNN panel last night that they were operating as a live public writer's room, just making things up to see what might stick. The funny thing, of course, is that the interview wasn't live. So you would think that all of them had a chance to watch the interview once or twice and think about it for a while before they actually got on television and talked about it. Just another level to the total contrivance, the performance of it all. We'll skip forward to CNN's Ashley Allison following Stead Herndon's vibes-based analysis.
It's familiar and relatable, and I think that's something that she's grown in, and we saw that this evening.
Interesting, Ashley.
So I think I would break this down into 3 parts: values, vision, and her voice. And I think she made it very clear that she is still committed to her values, to be an American, to be a prosecutor, even though she may have changed on some positions, and she clearly outlined where she had changed. I think on the vision, she attempted to draw the contrast without talking about Donald Trump, but still being very clear and not berating her current boss, actually. And when you think about the opposite ticket of J.D. Vance, where Donald Trump's vice president isn't even on the ticket anymore, we don't need to go down why that is the case, but she was clearly able to draw her vision for how she wants to take the country forward with her opportunity economy, and then her voice. I think so many Americans want to know, who is she and does she have command of her voice? And she answered every question. Now, you might not like the way she answered them, but she answered them as a capable, qualified leader. And I do think she moved the ball forward a little bit. You know, maybe she didn't score a touchdown tonight, but she definitely moved down the field.
All right.
So her values are that she's an American and a prosecutor. Her vision is that she drew a contrast between her and Donald Trump without mentioning him, even though she mentioned him in answer after answer. And then as far as her voice is concerned, she answered all the questions and sounded like a qualified leader. And so she moved the ball down the field. She didn't score a touchdown, but she moved the ball down the field. That was a vibes-based 10 yards, and now she gets a fresh set of downs. So after 4 blistering vibes-based takes from 4 different communists, Scott Jennings, the token normie establishment Republican, attempts to set all those child brains straight.
I agree with Stead about this idea of the question of who's going to change will be the fundamental defining question of the election. And I was sort of watching this, holistically. What is she saying? What does she look like? What's on the screen? So at the beginning, when she's talking about Biden and their record, our screen said, this is called the Chiron, the headline at the bottom. It said, Harris stands by Biden administration economic record. She is making it clear that she will embrace and be a continuation of Biden's economic policy, his record, what they've done. She offered no remorse, no regrets, no introspection about anything they've done. She continued to blame inflation on this fantasy price gouging idea. She had no additional thoughts on the economic situation in the country or what they've done beyond just saying, Joe Biden and I have done a great job. Now, if I were the Trump people, I would be salivating over the idea that that's how they are going to run the race. I don't believe it's tenable. I also thought it was interesting that she didn't take any responsibility at the end for telling the American people that Joe Biden was fine and he was strong. When we all know that's not true. That's why he's out of the race, and she's still standing by the idea that he was fine and he's strong and that he's fine today. Nobody believes that, and I just think at some point, then why isn't he running?
Because he's too old, point blank. Same reason why Donald Trump probably shouldn't be running, because he's too old and out of touch.
I think most Americans know the truth, and when you're running to be president and you're willing to look them in the face and tell them something they know that is not true, it does speak a little
it's
bit
also
to
a
your
question,
character.
Scott, and curious what you think about this, Axe. Will voters care about that part of it, which is kind of backward looking, or do they care about what's next?
And that's really it. If you're not obsessed with the political soap opera on television or constantly involved with image creation online, and you haven't been swayed by the vibes-based campaign to believe that Kamala Harris is a real candidate for real president running a real campaign as just about the most popular politician who's ever lived, you probably don't think it's worth pretending you're not being lied to. Now, Ashley Allison admitting that Biden is too old while pretending that Kamala wasn't lying was amazing. I guess the die-hard degenerate child brains on the uniparty left are now comfortable with ageism right there on television and comfortable with talking about how the fake president is too old, as if that ageist claim is somehow the appropriate justification for a blatant and obvious coup. People who were not Joe Biden decided that Joe Biden should not be president anymore and therefore would not be running a campaign anymore. And this commie is so brazen that she's just like, oh yeah, well, he was too old, so we got rid of him. But if you were to challenge Ashley Allison and say, isn't that ageist? I was told I could be canceled for that. And now you're just doing it on television. It's like how I can be canceled for being racist when I'm not racist, but you can be racist on television and everyone applauds. You want to know what control over media looks like? That's what it looks like. This is not about reverse racism. I don't care about what these people think of me or think of white people. They're retarded. I don't care what they think of old people. They told us to wear 2 masks in our car because they were doing it themselves. They wanted to follow the rules harder than anyone else because that would allow them to wield power over you. And the more important they made it seem, the more power they could get because the more justified they would be in acting like tattletales. They have child brains. What do you want me to say? Speaking of Kamala, here is another clip. This is a televised focus group by MSNBC. And no offense to any of the participants who may well have been acting naturally, but if we are seeing something pre-recorded and edited on mainstream cable television, it's because they want to show us.
You feel some kinship towards her as a mixed person?
Not personally. I find a lot of her trajectory to not be my brand of woman leader. We've got 3 major international crises going on and someone applying to be commander-in-chief. As a woman, I want to see you do more than, appeal to giggling and having a girl moment on the stage.
Wow. Someone's not buying the vibes-based campaign, and it's even a person of mixed ethnicity. That's right. MSNBC had a panel of people who were ethnically mixed to ask them whether or not they felt a kinship with Kamala Harris based on their status as mixed-race individuals. That clip is absolutely crazy. That busts up the key Kamala Harris narratives. Why would NBC allow this on their airwaves? Aren't they supporting Kamala Harris? It's like they're trying to undermine her, just like when CNN seemed like it was trying to undermine her by making her look like a tiny little sprite next to a monstrous Tim Walz. Even Dana Bash looking like twice her size. They have full control over the presentation. They have full control over the media. Why is Kamala Harris looking so bad? I get it. They're saying that she did great. They edited things and threw her softball and set up questions to make her look great. So why then are all these TV stations and why is her campaign allowing these things to be said about her? These are the things that people who might support her do not want to hear, but they're hearing them, and that can't help. So that means either they don't have the media control, or they aren't actually trying to protect her, or both. I'm not sure what else it could be. We talked many times about the great replacement of Joe Biden theory. And we have to be open to the idea of a great replacement of Kamala Harris. The whole thing is very underhanded. They are signaling that they are very supportive of her. They believe all the vibes are headed in the right direction. But at the same time, the subtext and what they're showing the audience is designed to chip away at the very image they're trying to create. And strangely, this morning we get this from the Washington Post. Maryland Governor Moore calls false Bronze Star claim honest mistake after report. So we have a stolen valor claim already on Tim Walz, and now there is something along those lines about Maryland Governor Wes Moore, the guy they call the next Obama. This was one of the people they talked about as a potential replacement in this fake presidential campaign for Joe Biden. This is a guy they're trying to elevate to a national figure. I've mentioned before that the entirety of this fake campaign, the Republican primaries, and this presidential election cycle has been a process of exposing, discrediting, and essentially eliminating all of these so-called rising stars of both party establishments. Ron DeSantis is a zero now. We saw who came out and supported him, and that process continues to unfold. That process has also been unfolding in the House and Senate over these last 3.5 years, seeing who's who. And now the top Democrat candidates are being run through and discredited right now. All of these are PR battles playing out in the media, in public. You just heard Ashley Allison on CNN say that J.D. Vance might not be on the ticket anymore. Well, first of all, fake campaign. He's just playing the role of running mate right now. And of course, I said that at the beginning. Did anyone else say that at the beginning? I didn't hear anyone else saying that at the beginning. But they're talking about replacing him, trying to pump up other establishment candidates, maybe just trying to make the Trump campaign look bad or suggest Donald Trump makes bad decisions. But what's with the Wes Moore hit piece in the New York Times the morning after Kamala's big interview? This is a short article. Maryland Governor Wes Moore entered the holiday weekend in damage control mode after the New York Times reported Thursday that the Democrat and Army veteran once falsely claimed to have been awarded the Bronze Star for his service in Afghanistan. For reasons that the Times called unclear, 2 television interviewers introduced Moore as a Bronze Star recipient in separate interviews before his 2022 bid for governor. Moore did not correct them, but insisted when the issue surfaced during the campaign that he had never claimed to have received the award. But Moore claimed just that in writing in 2006, when applying for a White House fellowship, the Times reported, based on a copy of his application obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. For my work, the 82nd Airborne Division have awarded me the Bronze Star Medal and the Combat Action Badge, he wrote. In a written statement issued Thursday, Moore asserted that he listed the Bronze Star at the behest of his commanding officer, who had recommended Moore for it and had assumed it would come through because 2 other senior officers had signed off on it. And again, in Moore's words, that's an honest mistake. And of course, this was only found out through a Freedom of Information Act request. This is not a takedown. Of course, it is a takedown. It's a hit piece. It's a preemptive strike against Wes Moore to diminish his standing as a possible replacement for Kamala Harris when the moment arrives. And I expect, perhaps as soon as this weekend, we will see the quote-unquote leaks of the rest of that Kamala Harris interview. The strange thing is that these commies have probably convinced themselves, they have deluded themselves into believing that the Kamala Harris campaign is actually doing a great job, and they really are this popular. They might well believe that. They might believe it so much that they think they can pull it off again. They might tell themselves, well, you know, the campaign strategy is perfect. We can do this for real, but we can't do it with Kamala. That's not going to work. You know who would be great in a vibes-based campaign? Michelle Obama. Maybe we should bring Joe back in as president, blame the whole coup on Kamala, get rid of her, and bring Big Mike in as the fake president's fake vice president. That would be fun, wouldn't it? There are all sorts of rumors about the story finally breaking. What was Kamala Harris doing at the DNC on January 6th, 2021, when they found those very real pipe bombs? There are lots of hints. There's some connection. You have to imagine there are countless ways to take this lady out. The Trump deranged commies out there can lie to themselves all they want about Kamala being qualified and Kamala being prepared and Kamala being competent. Abby Phillip told CNN's viewers that Kamala was a homework doer. She's always prepared. She knew exactly what to say throughout that interview. They can all pretend, but deep down they know they're pretending. They think it's worth it to say that because they need to say and do anything necessary to get rid of Donald Trump, to make sure Donald Trump is never the president again, which means, of course, they will accept a Kamala replacement. They don't give two damns about democracy or what it actually means. They don't care that no one voted for any of this, just like they didn't care that Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes. It's only moral relativism. They only care about the consequences. They care about remaining in power because that's going to allow them to just punish everyone else who might get in their way. But they don't believe it. And that's the point. If Kamala was replaced with anyone, they would immediately agree that that was the right choice and that they love Kamala and think it would have been historic. But maybe something more than a vibes-based campaign is needed. So it's time to get serious, and it doesn't matter if the voters didn't choose it. The voters don't choose any of this in the first place. Gosh, I hope they don't find out. I mean, a lot of them have found out. It's the vast majority of the country now who've found out. Even the people who pretend not to have found out have found out. Now it's just a matter of whether all of these moral relativists can hold on to their public image long enough to sell the theft of another election. But that's going to depend on total information dominance, and they don't have that anymore. We talked about Mark Zuckerberg admitting that Facebook and Meta interfered in the election by censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story and by censoring American citizens. We know he spent nearly $500 million putting the election fraud apparatus in place, and his platform censored all kinds of medical content that very likely cost thousands and thousands of lives, not to mention jobs, businesses, relationships, reputations. Well, Trump is releasing a new book full of photographs called Save America. And next to a picture of a meeting in the Oval Office featuring Jared Kushner and one Mark Zuckerberg, Trump wrote he would bring his very nice wife to dinners, be as nice as anyone could be, while always plotting to install shameful lockboxes in a true plot against the president, all in caps. We are watching him closely, Trump wrote, and if he does anything illegal this time, he will spend the rest of his life in prison, as will others who cheat in the 2024 presidential election. Now, to me, that does not sound like a warning to Mark Zuckerberg. That sounds like a warning to everyone who might cheat in the 2024 election. Zuckerberg seems to be well under control, and you have to imagine that he has been for years now. Over to Zero Hedge. A federal judge in Texas has ruled that a lawsuit brought by Elon Musk's ex against Media Matters can proceed to trial after dismissing a request by the Democrat-run enterprise. Because the court has personal jurisdiction over defendants, venue is proper, and plaintiff has properly pled its claims, defendant's motion to dismiss is denied, wrote Judge Reed O'Connor in his ruling. X, formerly known as Twitter, filed the suit in November after Musk threatened to bring a quote-unquote thermonuclear lawsuit against the left-leaning nonprofit and all those who colluded for completely misrepresenting the real user experience on X. According to the lawsuit, Media Matters, founded by Democrat operative David Brock, the boyfriend of James Alefantis, who left the organization in 2022, used manipulative and deceptive tactics to convince advertisers like Apple, IBM, and Disney that hateful content was being displayed next to their brands, leading them to pause their X advertising campaigns. Basically, Media Matters manipulated the platform, refreshing the content of quote-unquote extremists until certain ads would pop up from corporations they could include when making the claim that X, formerly Twitter, was an unsafe place for major companies to advertise. Zero Hedge includes a tweet from last fall by X's current CEO, Linda Yaccarino. If you know me, you know I'm committed to truth and fairness. Here's the truth. Not a single authentic user on X saw IBM's, Comcast's, or Oracle's ads next to the content in Media Matters article. Only 2 users saw Apple's ad next to the content, at least one of which was Media Matters. Data wins over manipulation or allegations. Don't be manipulated. Stand with X. Think about how this would have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The allegations would have been all that mattered. Media Matters would have manipulated the platform. There would be one total instance of what they're claiming, and maybe not even that one, and then they would publish their report, and the media would put it everywhere. Advertisers' content is being placed next to extremist content on X. All the advertisers need to boycott. Who else was claiming that? Oh, the ADL. Is that Zionist organization that works to censor any dissent regarding their cause whatsoever? Oh, yes, it is. Isn't that the exact sort of financial and economic control the regime has always wielded in its efforts to overthrow countries around the world? Why, yes, it is. Isn't that incredible? In earlier times, they would have been able to destroy the platform, and then they would just wage propaganda warfare and lawfare until they bled the company dry or had their demands met. They don't have any case. They'll almost certainly lose, but they don't care. Partly because they print the money and run the judicial system, but also because the lawfare would have already achieved its intended outcome. And speaking of Elon, this is from yesterday in Reuters. Brazil judge blocks Starlink accounts in the country amid X spat, sources say. Brazilian Supreme Court Judge Alexander de Moraes on Thursday ordered the blocking of the financial accounts of billionaire Elon Musk's Starlink due to the lack of legal representatives in the country for social media platform X, a Supreme Court source told Reuters. And that's the Supreme Court of Brazil, obviously. Moraes and Musk have been in a public feud for months after X failed to comply with legal orders to block certain accounts accused of spreading fake news and hate messages. In a statement on X, formerly Twitter, Starlink wrote, "This order is based on an unfounded determination that Starlink should be responsible for the fines levied unconstitutionally against X. It was issued in secret and without affording Starlink any of the due process of law guaranteed by the Constitution of Brazil. We intend to address the matter legally." So Brazil is freezing the accounts and banning financial transactions for Starlink, owned by SpaceX, of which Elon Musk is, of course, the face, another Defense Department-linked company. How does it happen? But it's not X, formerly Twitter. So who's the real target here? Is it X? Is it Elon Musk? Or is it just free speech in Brazil? And it's probably that one. In response, Elon Musk replied on X, formerly Twitter, "Many remote schools and hospitals depend on SpaceX's Starlink," and he's talking about in Brazil, of course. "SpaceX will provide internet service to users in Brazil for free until this matter is resolved, as we cannot receive payment but don't want to cut anyone off." Isn't it amazing? Starlink just keeps popping up in all of these places all over the world that the regime is trying to keep under control. And no matter what they do, they just can't cut the internet off from their people. It's almost like the way to beat the regime and their total control of communications and finance is not to head on down to your local elementary school cafeteria and hit a bunch of buttons on an iPad attached to a black box. It's to actually build a parallel system that people can live in and live with. And it might not immediately be as smooth and convenient as the old system. The new system might not work the way the old system did, and it might take some time to learn it. But are we actually trying to conquer the global regime? Or are we just trying to tell ourselves we did the best when we get home from the local elementary school cafeteria and then watch the TV tell us what our lives will be like for all our days to come? You're being shown that the control over the means of information has been wrested from the regime. It's not going back. I think most people agree with me when I say that Joe Biden, the fake president, does not seem to have any control over the country's military. And so what's left? Just the currency, huh? Well, the country's $35 trillion in debt on that fiat currency, with another $16 trillion expected over the next 11 years. But it'll be way more than that if the regime keeps going like this. So what happens if a parallel system arises there too? What will become of all that debt and the regime's fiat currency? It seems like things are going okay. All the weapons they used to overthrow countries are no longer in their hands, or they just no longer work. And people are blackpilling over fake elections? Give me a break. Stop being influenced by the Trump deranged. The point is to wake up. Trump keeps saying it's fake. It's because it's fake. The real system is already built in parallel and it's waiting for us. But we have to move to it. So if you're experiencing Trump derangement syndrome, or maybe even a bout of normieism or a brief spell of retardation, there is now a cure. This was released yesterday by Nicole Shanahan, the running mate in RFK Jr.'s fake campaign.
Are you or your loved ones suffering from illnesses such as TDS, also known as Trump derangement syndrome? Do you dismiss or deny the current issues facing our country, such as historic inflation, illegal immigration, corporate corruption, World War III escalations, and the chronic disease epidemic? Are you willing to elect someone who was the least popular vice president in modern history, and who offers no policy or vision for America simply because your brain keeps telling you anyone but Trump? If so, you might be struggling from TDS. Introducing Independence. Independence allows you the freedom to finally think independently once again. Instead of believing everything you hear from the mainstream media, Independence allows for constructive critical thinking.
I used to hear people on the news say things like,
Donald Trump and the movement he has encouraged are a threat to democracy.
And I instantly believed it. With Independence, I now realize the media is run by the Democrat elite, who are a corrupt oligarchy that censors free speech, silences political opponents, supports forever wars, and abandons democracy by anointing its candidates.
Independence may not be for everyone. If you enjoy being lied to about your president's cognitive abilities, support Orwellian totalitarianism, or are excited about communist fiscal policy, Independence may not be right for you. Common side effects of Independence may include an awakening of rational thought, successfully identifying propaganda, freedom of choice, loss of hatred, anti-narcissistic behavior, and love of democracy.
I used to blindly hate whoever my party was running against. I didn't care about facts or policy because I was hopelessly indoctrinated. With Independence, I'm much more interested in policies that uphold democracy, and I truly care about the health of our country and its citizens.
Ask your doctor if Independence is right for you, and enjoy your freedoms once again.
Let's see what that does to the vibes-based campaign. So Monday is Labor Day, and I am not going to do a show, but I am going to post something. It'll be a surprise. I hope you enjoy that. And otherwise, as far as this podcast is concerned, I will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.